spiel again. Take two. I think I was still connected to the Wi-Fi where I was coming from, so the phone didn't know how to act. Act right. Let's go. Hopefully, I'm not going to be too choppy. I'm hoping that I'm coming in loud and clear. Turn off my fan a little bit. It's a snowstorm. We had a snowstorm here, so everybody's kind of making their way slowly. I wanted to have a quick conversation about Freudian psychology and the black mind, the black family, and the black worldview. It's very important to understand that many of the psychoanalyticals of modern science were birthed under the umbrella of white supremacy. And so therefore many of the presumptuous mentalities behind modern day psychology came out of the belly of white racism and from the mouths and the minds of individuals who were taught and brought up under the culture of racism. And so, for example, Freud had said this. Freud had said that it pulls on civilization, the inferior man. The inferior man pulls on civilization. When he referred to the inferior man, he was talking about blacks. Because in order for them to live with us, they have to engage the lower level of their psyche. Again, he said in order for civilization to live with the inferior man, speaking of black people, that would pull on the lower levels of their psyche, meaning that to deal with black people would make white people essentially dumber, more depraved. They have to deal with us in a more brutal fashion because of who we are. And therefore, the reason that slavery and all of these types of things exist is not because of a predilection of whites to hate humanity and to utilize their cultural superiority to keep a certain race of people down hegemonically for their own financial and economic advantages. But it is because we are so difficult that it required them to go to their baser self in order to deal with the brute nature of who we are as black people. And so now when you have a psychological character like Freud, who is so preeminent in creating many of the offshoots of psychoanalytics and psychothinking and psychology, how do you now draw from that and say, well, you know, let me apply some of these things in respect to my family, in respect to our relationships, in respect to our worldview, when you're drawing from something that was basically constructed with the mentality that you are an inferior individual, an inferior mind, and an inferior civilization of people. And so what I'm trying to say to you is that the greatest counselors that we can find are counselors who come from the same worldview and mentality and approach to life as ourselves. Now don't get me wrong now. Just because they're a black person doesn't mean that they're a good counselor for a black person. We understand that, you know, the color doesn't make the mind. We understand that. We see that very clearly. I've lived that very clearly, that the color absolutely doesn't make the mind. It is where your intellect and where your education and your information comes from. That's what makes the mind. And if you were put in a particular vacuum of thinking, and given a degree within that vacuum of thinking, you that's who you are. That's your mind. That's your attitude. That's your approach. And so remember, and I don't like to continuously go about this over and over again, but more modern psychology has a presumption of black male guilt. There's a presumption that black men per se, and especially when when women or black women are having conversations with psychologists, there's a lot of times a strong presumption that the black male is guilty even before he is heard. Oh, this guy. So why is that? Why do we have this incredible hard relationship when it comes to the socializing of the black family, of the approaches that we have of the black man with the black woman? It really is because of modern day Euro psychology affecting how we live our lives and how we espouse our worldview. Let me give you an example. So if I believe that man has a soul, I believe that man is a being, he's a spiritual being, his spirituality, and excuse me if I don't fit the narrative of what you believe, but this is how I phrase it. I believe our soul is a spirit, and that is who we are. And that what God has done to us is he created a spiritual nature in us, and that spiritual nature is our soul. And that immaterial nature of us, what God did is he put a shell around it and called it a body. And then what he did is he breathed into it and gave us the breath of life that caused our soul to be alive. That's why scripture says, and man became a living soul. The spirit in us is the spirit of life given to us by God. And though we have a soul, we have a spiritual aspect of who we are. Now, if I prescribe to that, and I also prescribe to the fact that that soul that he made was made in the image and likeness of God, because God is a spirit. And so he made something like himself, which was a spiritual being that could think, that could reason, that could reproduce, that could do good, that could create. He made something like himself. And that's who I am. And then I go now to psychiatry or psychology or Freudian, a Freudian mentality in respect to the human nature and the human so-called psyche, and I replace my soul with a psyche, because remember, Freud doesn't believe in God. Freud doesn't have a worldview that there is a creator, there is a God. His humanistic approach to life does not start from the position of a divine being who is a creator, who is an architect, who is creating everything according to his will, who is putting things together. He doesn't come from that perspective. He comes from the opposite perspective. He is saying that there is no soul, but man has a psyche. And man has an id and an ego. And so he comes from these different, psyche meaning mind, ego meaning soul, if you're trying to relate them over. So our psyche is our thinking, our ego is who we are. And he now takes us away from a paradigm that was first and foremost vested in a more spiritual concept, and takes us into some kind of academic thing of his own creation, and simply says that man has a mind and man has an ego, and that certain men's minds and ego are superior to other men's minds and ego, and therefore we should not see the brutality that we do to certain others as our failure, but we should see it as the fact that these beasts, these brutes of individuals can't really relate to us, so it pulls against us. And so now we take that and we extrapolate it from a Freudian era, and we continue along the lines of how do we build out societies where you have a dominant group of people who are now affecting how do they manage black people. Let's go past slavery. Let's get into the 60s and the 70s. The 60s and the 70s is where we see a lot of our family courts starting to create these very interesting concepts in respect to the black family, and the 80s and so on. The black family, 30s, the 40s, the 50s, even the 60s, the black family used to be a very strong thing. It was based on God. It was based in devotion. It was based in commitment. It was based in work ethic, right? Our women were not running into scenarios where the predominant mindset was a sexuality, living off of the avails of prostitution, or a sexual promiscuous life was not considered to be okay. OnlyFans accounts didn't exist. You know what I'm saying? The IG nature, the Instagram nature of I'm an Instagram model because I'm just naked on Instagram all the time. All these things did not exist. And black men who fed into that, we have a current epidemic of black male culture who feeds into the sex industry, right? It's in our music. Guys go to the strip joint for food. It's in our movies. It's in our everyday commentary. It's a thing where you take your girlfriend to the strip joint. We have levitated to something very, very different. And the question is why? How did that happen? How did we get to the place where, you know, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, black people were not trying to live debaucherous lives, but now the liberality of our thinking has us thinking, well, all these things are cool, it's okay, it's not a big deal. How have we gone, you know, from the place of Lena Horne to Glorilla? Like how have we done that? How has Diana Ross been taken? Cardi B has taken her place. How have we gone to the place, you know, where, you know, Sidney Poitier, you know, is now Tory Lanez? Like where do we go? How did we go wrong? This is our question. It starts here. It starts in the mind. It starts in how we are raising a culture and what we're doing with it. Let's go with this, right? Let's talk about, I don't know what you guys call it, it's different names in different states and different places. Here we just call it straight up welfare, right? The welfare culture that was supposed to be how do you think the black male should deal with the temptations of the new culture? I'm gonna talk on that right now. But the welfare culture, so you got, you know, black women who society has created a social system of the single black woman, the single black mother. And how does the single black mother come? Single black mother comes because you know, you have a war against black men. You're imprisoning black men. You're killing them. You're not allowing them to have appropriate jobs so that they now have to hustle to take care of their families. And then you are making the hustle illegal. And so what you're doing is you're separating the black man from his family through multiple purposes, right? You're either not employing him, you're not educating him, you're coming hard for his hustle, right? Really hard, because the mafiosa, the mafia guys, you're not coming hard for the Italian mafia. He's got a good family. You're not coming hard for the Chinese mafia. He's got a good family. You're not coming hard for the Japanese mafia. He's got a good family. You're not coming hard for the Irish mafia. He's got a good family. So you're focusing your crime focus is on the black community when there are a whole bunch of other communities committing crime in greater abundance. And now you said, oh, we got to support these poor black people left by themselves, and you've created a black welfare system for black mothers. So you're not hiring the same thing with the black women. You're not hiring them, you're not giving them jobs, you're not setting up structures for them to work. You're setting up structures for them to stay home and to say, we will support you if you don't have a black man in the house. Here they do it very, very strongly in Canada. We will give you housing if you don't have a black man living in the house. We will give you finances if you don't have a black man living in the house. You don't want to be with the black man you have living in the house? Come to court. We will make sure he has to pay for everything. We will make sure that he still has to support you, but you don't have to have him living in the house. And you will create movies, and you will create social commentary with a single black mother, with kids being raised by a single black mother. It's okay. Oh, it's okay. It's okay if mom doesn't have dad in the house. It's okay. It's okay if I'm raised by a single mother. And then what's next? You're raising little boys to hate even their fathers. Oh, my father wasn't there for me. My father was never around. You never had the conversation. You don't know what the situation was. And so we've raised now a culture where the single black mother or single parenting households is now the norm. It's encouraged, right? It even reaches church. The pastor is preaching to women because the church is full of women, because the preacher has chased all the men out of church. Chase has told him, well, you know, Sister Gloria, if he's not doing what a man's supposed to do, you know what, sometime God tells us to move on. All these things, all these concepts that have chased men out of the family structure, but other cultures are told, no, you're supposed to stay together. We're not trying to do what they're doing because they're the lower, most inferior men. Got a good question here. How do you think the black male should deal with the temptations of new culture you speak of? They should get married. That's it. That's how men handle temptation. They find a woman that doesn't just see them physically, but sees them mentally and spiritually, that can build with them, grow with them, understands them psychologically. A woman that can speak to your psychological nature, your spirit and your soul, if you want to call it that, because that's what it is. Because that woman will be your best counselor. She's your best psychiatrist. If your spouse doesn't understand your mind, then she shouldn't be your spouse. And the problem, to answer your question even more thoroughly, isn't that men are being tempted physically. It is that they are not being stimulated mentally. That's the real turn on, ladies. Is that it's one thing to have a butterfly tattoo on your hoo-ha, but it's another thing to be able to be a beautiful queen that can engage me in the areas of my thinking, my thought, that can look into me and say, hey, you know what? You know, every time you get upset and every time you get stressed, you do this. Do you understand this? And you understand this about yourself? Let me show you you. The greatest thing that a man can be shown by a woman isn't the voluptuousness of her curves. It is showing him the reflection of himself in her, because that's who she's supposed to be. She's supposed to be the reflection of her man. And if she can't see you, she shouldn't be your wife. She shouldn't be your woman. You shouldn't take her to lunch. And so the greatest temptations that men have is that we have now poured ourselves into the physicality of empty mental shells who are stimulating us physically, but we have not engaged in all of these women who are out there with great minds, with the capacity to speak into us, but because we're so focused on these individuals who are basically twerking their way into our hearts. That's my opinion with that. So we are now stuck in a scenario where the twerker becomes our wife. And now when the twerker girl becomes your wife, you are stuck with an individual that after a while, the twerking becomes old, right? And not even the twerker becomes your wife. You might have the good girl who becomes your wife too. She becomes your wife, but guess what she can't do? She can't stimulate you like the twerker can. So she's picked one or the other. Or let's say she can. Let's say she does have twerker capacities. I'm sorry to use these terminologies, but we fell into this conversation, so I'm gonna run with it. And let's say she is a woman who has means, she has a good job, she presents herself well. We have created a culture where women have been, when they are empowered, they lower the value of the man in their lives. Because a man is not simply a mule who brings burdens and parcels. He's not just a provider. He should be for himself and his family, but he's not just a provider. He's a human being that requires someone to emotionally build him. He doesn't need you to spot him in the gym. He doesn't even need you sometimes to lift the other side of the couch. He needs you to help him, especially a black man, in a world that he's continuously under pressure, mental pressure, emotional pressure, cultural pressure, continually being identified as an individual who's either called various names, right? A non-producer. He's called a deadbeat dad. He's called an individual. You're underemployed. You're undereducated. He's always under something. And so it is incumbent upon the black woman to become the best psychiatrist the black man has. She is the best psychiatrist, psychologist you have. And then let's turn it around. Many black women have done this, right? Very few of the ones I know, but many of the black women have done this. And so what is the next part? The next part is for the black man to become her number one. When you have a black woman who doesn't just want to sit on her behind and stay at home and watch you go to work every day, but actually is an industrious woman building stuff, and she's gone through stuff in her life, and she's arrived at a place in her life where certain aspects of her nature are fragile. You don't let that woman run to a psychiatrist. Don't let her run to a psychologist, bro. You better put on your counselor's hat and sit down and listen to how that woman relays her thoughts, relays her fragility, relays the things that she's going to. And you better become a support structure. You better not become one of these, well, you better suck it up. It's a hard world out there. It's a tough world. No, you're dealing with a woman. And she needs an ear to be listened to. She needs a chest to be laid upon. She needs to be told all of the aspects and to be broken down of, this is what you're good at. This is what I see you do. Are you kidding me? Last week you did this and you did that. You built this and you built that. You need to be her number one fan too. You cannot rely on these counselor systems that are built to break up black families. They are built to be pro-feminist agendas, right? Radical feminist agendas. They are built to focus on humanism and not a divine, orchestrated worldview of family and life. They are not built for us. They have been built for an atheistic, European, humanistic mind. They haven't been built for us. They don't understand our history. Let me hurt your feelings for a second. And some of you are going to jump on this and say, oh, this is where he was going the whole time. No. Let me break this down. Ancestrally, the ancestral nature of where most of us came from. We came from what I'll say it nicely, then I'll say it what it is. Come from blended families. Blended families. Families where there is more than one mother to the children, right? Or let's say it plain, polygamous type families, right? Call them blended right now. I'll call them blended families, right? You'll say, oh, this is where this guy's going. I'm not going there. When you look at the biblical accounts of historical men that you call leaders, some of the Judeo-Christian positions that you call leaders, those guys most of them are polygamists. Most of them are guys who ended families, right? And these women were understanding of these guys with their blended families. So now you have a guy, he's gone through a scenario in his life. He has one baby mama over here, another baby mama over there. He's got a blended family, right? What has he been now? He's been also groomed in a social culture where black men's libido is being honored more than black men's responsibility. And you have this man who has now been groomed to not necessarily be in a position where he has a nuclear family. He has a blended family, right? And so now black women now are coming to this same man, or coming to this group of men, and they are looking for isolated families. And this guy, even if he's isolated to you, his history has been that he has now had families all over the place with other people. And now you've got to figure out, well, how do I blend with this new man and these other women who also he has responsibilities towards. And now watch this, you've adopted this European construct of what a family is, and immediately you approach this situation with shame. Man, I don't want no guys it goes both ways. I don't want no guys got these baby mamas all over the place, which you have the right to say. And the guys say, oh, I don't want this woman got these children all over the place. You got a right to say. Everybody's got a right to do what they want. But we have come from cultures of blended families. We have not come from these European constructs of situations where they can barely take care of one woman. We've come from scenarios. Many of you can say, oh, my grandmother had 14 children. My great-grandmother had 25 children. All these kind of conversations. My granddaddy had about 15 children. We come from these different types of families, whether they're good or bad, whether you like it or you don't. This is the history of what we come from. This is what we come from. So if you now approach our living out of our lives based on what we have come from. My mother had me at about 18 years of age. Her mother had, I think, 5, 6 kids, and then 1 kid for another man, right? And you go back and you go back and you go back, and you'll see, especially post post-slavery, just post-slavery, and then you go back even before it, you'll see that we've come from this concept of blended families. We are not Europeans, and therefore the approach to our life, when we try to live out a European existence, it fails. It fails. It fails miserably. It's not who we are a lot of times. And God bless those that can say, yeah, you know, my daddy and my mom, they've been together for 55 years. My daddy's never cheated on my mom never stepped out on my daddy, and they've always had this, and they've always had that. And that's fine. That's absolutely wonderful. But unfortunately, they are the exception and they're not the rule. In North America, they are not the rule. That's why we honor them. That's why when we hear, yeah, they've been married for 45 years and they got 3 children, we honor them. But we understand them to be the exception and not the rule. And so when modern psychology takes an approach of a Eurocentric family structure that has not come from our ancestry, and then tries to counsel us and tries to tell that black woman or tell that black man how to live and how to behave, they are coming from a place that we ancestrally don't come from. They don't come from a place where they should say, listen, let's start with this, responsibility. They should come from a place of responsibility. Responsibility means that you need to have a mindset of responsibility to what a family is going to be for you in the future, period. A responsibility of what you bring to the table as a woman. As a woman, ancient cultures, they would educate the women because she's the first educator. You make sure she goes to college. You make sure she has information because she's the first educator. The husband would be the worker. The woman would be the educator. Go into Africa and see how many women are in the market, working, doing business. Read the Proverbs 31 woman and see what she is. She is a woman sitting in the market, making business deals. That's what she is. She's a business maker. She's making deals. She's doing business. That's what the woman was taught to do in ancient civilization. Help the household, be an individual who is industrious, right? The men were meant to go out, conquest, land, cattle, gold, whatever, conquest. The women were spent to, let's now manage the conquest of my husband. This is how those things work. Let me see what people are saying. I'm proud of you, fam. I remember when I first found your page. Oh, Lord, get out the snow, boy. When I first found your page, 900 subscribers. That was during the con. Yeah, well, thank you, brother. I know folks, they come and they go. But I'm glad that they come, and I'm glad that you're staying, and I appreciate you very much, Famous X. I appreciate you very much, brother. I'm proud of you too. So now, listen, this is know why it's powerful for me? Because every single negative statistic of the black family I have experienced, I have lived. I have lived through it all. I have lived through all of them. I've been the single mom's child, firstborn, single mom child. I've been the first generation immigrant, right? First person in my family to go to university, right? First person in my family to get married. First person in my family to get divorced. I've gone through it all. And I've seen it. I've seen it so many times. And I sat back and watched it. My father, who I have a great relationship with, because I refused to buy into the social narrative of the absentee father doesn't love me. I needed to know the story. I need to know the circumstances. I refused to buy into it, that the absentee father abandoned you. When I know that I was taken from one place and taken to another. He didn't abandon. How can you abandon a child that is being transported from one country to another? What are you gonna do, chase him all over the world? So I made it my business to go back and say, Dad, I need to hear your side of the story. And you know what? Whatever it was, I accept it. Do you accept me? Do you see me as your son? I see you as my father. Done deal. And he has children here and there and there. And guess what? They're all my brothers and sisters. I don't buy into this. Well, I'm not embracing all those kids all over the place. They're your family. They're your family. How many stories do we hear about these women and men that get together and they're living together and they're in love and they realize somewhere down the family line, oh my God, we're related. We're brother and sister, or some crazy story like that. We have to reacquaint ourselves with the reality of the black family. You know, somebody said to me the other day, Batgirl said to me the other day, she goes, you know what? The reason I can have these conversations with you, because even sometimes they're troubling, I prefer to be with a real person, with somebody who's actually giving me something real. And this is the scenario that we must, it's not always pretty, but sometimes it's just the real. It's just what it is. It's just what it is. And I'll tell some of you, if you are content to live with a person who has a so-called non-Eurocentric family history, live with your person, yes. Don't make nobody chase you out of the house because you are living in an unconventional situation. As much as you try to make that normal, do it. As much as you try to put God in it, do it. But don't let nobody chase you out of your situation because it doesn't fit the realm of their conventionality. Come on, man. Don't let nobody do that to your life. Don't let nobody do that to your life. If you're in the house with your husband, you're in the house with your man, and you're content, stay there. Listen, some of you look for your own problems. You want to dig up in phone, you want to dig up in social media, and you're looking for problems. Listen, if you're with a good person, I guarantee you one thing, other people going to want to have them. Other people going to want to have them. Other people going to want to spend time with them. I would suggest you evaluate the quality of life that you are having with that individual. People always blowing up my phone. Don't adopt these new Eurocentric mentalities that there is such a thing as a proper family unit. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as a proper family. You know that? There's no such thing as a proper family. God himself allowed himself to come into a scenario where it looked like Mary got knocked up. God himself didn't come into a proper family. Come on, somebody. God himself came into a baby mama situation. That thing wasn't a proper family. And all of these families that you see, these folks who are Judeo-Christian with their strict, none of them were proper family. Abraham had a side piece who he got pregnant first. Jacob had 4 wives. Come on. Solomon had 1,000. David was hunting other people's wives, killing off people so he could have sex. Come on. Keep going. There's a whole lot of improper stuff. Esther had sex with the king before she got married. Come on. An improper family, there's no such thing. Family's just family. And the black family needs to face where they are, who they are, and what they are, and stop allowing Freudian mentalities to encroach upon who we are as people. All right? This is Del K. Braird's. I got people blowing up my phone. This is the real spiel, and we'll talk about it later. Love you. Bye-bye.